Here's where the problem is. In April, China overtook the United States as the world's top importer of crude oil, and 80% of this oil, and many other important resources, China imports through the Malacca Strait, which the Chinese Navy doesn't control. In this context, it's clear why Beijing claims sovereignty over nearly all of the South China Sea, and is building a military base in Djibouti. China supports counter-piracy operations in the Gulf of Aden, conducts humanitarian assistance and disaster response missions enabled by its hospital ship, and participates in large-scale, multinational naval exercises. Washington immediately protested against the China-Djibouti relations and expressed concern over China's plans to build a military base in the Obok region, but to no avail. China has to defend the supply of oil over a long way and isn't able to do it right now. Problem is, it doesn't have enough naval bases along vital shipping lines as of yet. Strings of Pearls strategy, initially suggested as a series of seaports and naval bases stretching along the Indian Ocean, has to resolve this issue. The seaports will be support places and investments that could pay dividends on a strategic level while causing broader security amenities. China's naval defense strategy is grounded on the combination of offshore waters defense with open seas protection concepts. The offshore waters defense consists of two missions. One is to protect China's eastern coastal area, which is the country's most economically vibrant region. The other is to ensure the safety of the expanding shipping lines that are vital to China's economic growth. Open seas protection concept also has two elements. One is to extend maritime protection to waters over 600 miles from the Chinese coast by building supply depots in the disputed South China Sea, trying to conduct submarine activities in the Indian Ocean, and acquiring bases beyond the region. The other is to develop capabilities to conduct non-conventional security operations outside the region, such as naval diplomacy, joint maritime law enforcement, and humanitarian assistance. Compared with the United States, the PLA Navy has sufficient self-defense capabilities, but deficiency in cross-region operations and force projection is evident, though Beijing is trying to change that. On the other side, China's unique geographical location allows it to establish control over its local seas, the Yellow Sea, the East China Sea, and the South China Sea. That is what the United States has accused China of doing in the last 5 to 10 years. The so-called anti-access area denial, A2, AD, or the Fort Fleet strategy. This is the real reason for the boiling over for China's island work in the South China Sea. Washington is sufficiently alarmed by a perspective to lose the maritime control in the region, and has started the naval force race under an umbrella term of all domain access. Despite this, Beijing is adamant. In June, China said it was shifting work on disputed South China Sea islands from the dredging of land to the construction of military and other facilities. The U.S. containment policy against China includes not only holding of old alliances, but a creating of new. In the recent strategy, Washington pledges to strengthen cooperation with 6 long-standing allies: Australia, Japan, New Zealand, the Philippines, the Republic of Korea, and Thailand, and also lists 8 new partners: Bangladesh, Brunei, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Micronesia, Pakistan, Singapore, Vietnam. With help of its Asian allies, the U.S. are going to seal off the PLA Navy in South China Sea and prevent its moving into operational space. Further, Washington's diplomatic rhetoric over the long-standing allies, shared strategic interests, and cooperation in Asia, in fact, is aimed at establishing a coalition against China. Despite the fact that the U.S. official strategy is ignoring the Taiwan issue, the island may easily become a flashpoint of ongoing confrontation, and the Western media machine has already set the ground for it. On July 22nd, U.S. magazine, The Diplomat, reported that the People's Liberation Army soldiers were seen running towards a building that bears a striking resemblance to the Japanese-built presidential office in Taipei. During the Series C of this year's live-fire Stride 2015 Zurine military exercises, the magazine argues 2 things. First is that PLA is practicing the storming of the presidential office to bring pressure on Taiwan in the context of its presidential and legislative elections in January 16, 2016. Second is Chinese military has been preparing to invade the island, but the facts should be taken in its proper context. The military drills are a signal not for Taiwan, but for the US. China shows its capacity to solve a Taiwan problem by force, to predict an attempt to use the island for strengthening of the US military presence. Also, aggressive activity of US Special Services through Taiwan, or an economic sabotage threatening it. In other cases, Beijing would much prefer to reintegrate Taiwan without having to resort to force, but by cultural, economic, and political tools. Moreover, it already has a successful experience of lost territories reintegration, Macau and Hong Kong. Another area of the US-China geopolitical confrontation is the Indian Ocean. US strategists, media outlets and public experts argue India is a rival state for China. Monetary wealth and power growth of both states will result in inevitable clashes between them. According to them, the motive behind the string of pearls strategy isn't in solving the logistical problems of China.
Breaking. China warns the U.S. against naval patrols in disputed South China Sea. That's where China is building all those man-made islands and going into an expansionist phase. Beijing has warned Washington against any actions which would challenge China's, quote, sovereignty and security, end quote. The warning was in response to reports that the U.S. was planning fresh naval patrols in the disputed South China Sea. And we have to remind everyone here that China is building these man-made islands in international oceans. Of course, that is illegal of China to do so. But China doesn't care what anybody else says. Chinese Foreign Minister spokesman Jen Shuang said that tensions in the waters have stabilized due to the hard work of Beijing and Southeast Asian countries. He urges the U.S. to respect the current situation by not taking, quote, any actions that challenge China's sovereignty and security, end quote. RT reports. The statement follows a Sunday report by the Navy Times, which stated that the U.S. Navy and Pacific Command leaders were considering freedom of navigation patrols by the San Diego-based Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group, citing unnamed defense officials. A spokesman for Carrier Strike Group 1, David Bennett, said the group does not discuss future operations of its units, but said the group is, quote, on a regularly scheduled Western Pacific deployment as part of the U.S. Pacific Fleet-led initiative to extend the command and control functions of the U.S. Third Fleet, end quote.
China has indisputable sovereignty over the islands in the South China Sea and their adjacent waters. China respects freedom of navigation by the international community in accordance with international law. However, China firmly opposes utilizing this freedom as an excuse to infringe upon China's territorial sovereignty and security interests. With the joint efforts made by China and ASEAN members, peace and stability in the South China Sea is constantly improving. China hopes that countries outside the region can respect these efforts and promote positive impetus.
The ability of the Americans to project power everywhere in the world, the Chinese can challenge that only in their backyard.
And the Chinese do indeed seem to be challenging several U.S. allies in the South China Sea.
This is the Chinese Navy. This is the Chinese Navy. Please go away quickly.
American reconnaissance planes are flying patrols over artificial islands being constructed here by the Chinese on top of submerged coral reefs in disputed waters.
We're at Fiery Cross Reef, which is part of the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea. Currently what we're looking at is some construction on a landing strip.
It's important to understand that what China is doing to the Western media appears to be dangerous and aggressive. When you look at it from a military standpoint, it's pretty pathetic. I don't want to dismiss the Chinese. On land, if anybody invades them, it'll be devastating. It's building a navy. It has not yet built its first aircraft carrier effectively. We have over 10 carrier battle groups. They don't have any. To fight a carrier war, you have to have cruisers, destroyers, and they have to work together. The problem with the Chinese Navy is it has no admirals. That is, it has no admirals who've been trained by admirals who fought carrier battles. So what happens in the South China Sea is kind of a shadow play. Very good for public consumption. aided by the U.S. Navy Department, who wants to make it look as frightening as possible. But it really isn't.
On February 8, 2017, a Chinese military airborne early warning aircraft, KJ-200, came dangerously close to a U.S. Navy surveillance aircraft, P-3C Orion, in the South China Sea. U.S. military said the aircraft came within 1,000 feet, or 305 meters, of each other on Wednesday in the vicinity of the Scarborough Shoal, between the Philippines and the Chinese mainland. The Chinese aircraft essentially crossed the nose of the American plane, causing it to make an immediate turn. U.S. Pacific Command spokesman said that the incident occurred in international airspace above the South China Sea, while the U.S. Navy P-3C was on a routine mission operating in accordance with international law. The issue will be addressed in appropriate diplomatic and military channels. China's defense ministry told state media that the Chinese pilot responded with legal and professional measures during the inadvertent encounter. While Global Times stated an unnamed defense ministry official said that China hoped the U.S. side keeps in mind the present condition of relations between the two countries and militaries, adopts practical measures, and eliminates the origin of air and sea mishaps between the two countries.